Good afternoon. I'm talking to Pat Sherlock, who's president and founder of QFS Consulting. Good afternoon, Pat.
Hi, John. How are you?
Well, I look forward for some time to talking to you for a couple different reasons, but primarily because you were really a little bit outside the mold of the people I interview. Traditionally, they're top producing loan officers and regional managers. And you have your own particular niche, and of course you're very well known to our listeners out there. So I know you write extensively, and you also have published a book that's pretty famous in mortgage circles that is called what's it? Top of your
reaching the top of your
reaching
game.
the top of your game.
Practices of the top
mortgage originators, right? I know the MBA carries it, and
yeah, actually they were the publisher, and it came out in 2001, and it's really done very well.
I know it has. So it's probably their top producing book, if I...
That's what they tell me, and that's certainly a compliment to all the people that participated. As I had told you before, the book was really a 2-year research project before it even actually got published. I interviewed the top originator at the top 100 mortgage banking firms, and so it was quite extensive and involved many, many interviews and many, many hours of getting a hold of these people and getting the information from them. And what's kind of neat about it is that they all agreed to participate, which was really kind of positive, but they were sharing not just sales techniques, but the work habits, a lot of information about their early life. So it was fun to do, very difficult to do, and I've been very pleased that it's been very well received.
Well, I know that you are a consultant to the mortgage industry, primarily among the top 30 mortgage bankers in the country. But I always start off by asking the same question, and that is, where do you come from, and how did you get in the business? So why don't we start there?
It's been actually, I'm a real veteran of the industry. I've been in the industry, I guess, over 20 years. And interestingly enough, when I first started out, I worked for GE Capital, and I was a collector, so I actually did door-to-door collections. And from there, I left and joined Fannie Mae, and so I was at Fannie Mae, and I was on the negotiated transaction side. So I ended up seeing all the portfolios and all the types of loans that were out there, and this is back in the 1980s. And I left Fannie Mae to go to Wall Street, so I was in structured finance up in New York, and then spent time doing asset backs, which are non-mortgage related structured finance products, and then ended up being actually a head of production for Havana Mortgage. So there hasn't been much sides that I haven't been on the mortgage side of it. I started my own consulting business back in '91, so I've been at it from a consulting standpoint for the last 12 years. The book that I wrote, kind of interestingly enough, a lot of people think of me as the author, but really I was a business line manager, and I think a lot of the work that my company does is really looking at it from a business line manager.
Yeah, and I think that's what kind of separates you out from some of the other mortgage professionals who are engaged, like myself, in educating loan officers. And I do what I do, and others do what they do. But you really have kind of a unique perspective on it. I've always thought that your value added, so to speak, or your value proposition is the fact that you really have had numerous jobs that are really in different areas, including areas like doing mortgage-backed securities. I always thought that brought a lot of extra value to the process when you did this book.
Well, I kind of look at myself as a Renaissance person in the mortgage industry, and I do think that my long years in doing structured finance and securitizations, John, I actually did the first home equity securitization, so I kind of go back quite a ways with deals that are done really kind of relatively commonplace now, but I really look at kind of the analytical end of it as the way I apply it to the sales side of it. I do believe sales is essentially not a happenstance type of profession, but it's something that there are things that work and there are things that don't work. And the consulting work that I do is along the lines of helping companies improve their hiring success rates with loan officers and salespeople, in addition to improving their sales performance. So my firm comes along with the view of trying to address the whole sales process in somewhat of an analytical approach. And really the book, Reaching the Top of Your Game, is a review of what works and what doesn't work, and it's kind of interesting when I hear feedback from it, is that I get a lot of feedback from new originators coming into the business who find it really very helpful.
Oh yeah, oh, absolutely. I know you have a great fan club out there. But in that vein, since you brought the subject up, why don't we talk about in terms of a loan officer audience out there, as opposed to some of the top executives who may be listening to this too, but from their standpoint, some of the practices that you found in your interviews that work, and then perhaps go into some of the things that don't work.
Well, John, really there is, and actually what's kind of interesting, and part of what was seen in the original book, here were loan officers that were top producers all across the country. They were in big markets, small markets. They were in, super jumbos. They were in all kinds of different lines of market opportunities. But the fact of the matter was, and what was very clear after so many conversations and analysis that was done, that there were practices that were uniform among all these people, regardless of what the market is about. And certainly what I saw, and certainly what I talk about in the book, is that these practices really, in one aspect, I don't know that they're rocket scientists, but I do think that they are consistent patterns that the best do. And just to share with you about a couple of them is that it's very basic that the number one best practice of the top originators is the issue of they know what they want. And by that I mean they set goals for themselves internally. This is really independent of the company that they work for. The setting of goals might seem like a basic, but again, in our work that we do, we see it so many times where loan officers kind of let the market drive what their goals are, when in fact of the matter is that the top performers essentially establish what these goals should be for themselves internally. And then certainly some of the other practices, the number two practice, and one of the things that we're very active in training with loan officers is that the second part of it, again, this seems so basic, but so many loan officers skip this step, is that they write a marketing plan. You cannot skip that step. And again, loan officers that have marginal performance levels typically get stuck on that they really haven't looked at their market and what is the market opportunity and how can they best play at it. John, it was just very clear. Again, the folks that were interviewed in the book were half were males and half were females, but it really didn't matter what their gender was. These individuals are very clever at sitting and doing an analysis to figure out how they can compete in their market, and that requires a marketing plan. Certainly after they've been a top producer for many years, they are mentally doing the plan, but many of them will tell you that they will sit down, and some of them still do it currently, well, they will write in a notebook that they keep with them all the time, basically what their plan is for their market and how to be successful. It's very clear that without setting goals and writing a marketing plan that you're trying to accomplish in a market that is really very difficult, you're really letting your chances of success kind of be really driven by external factors, and what top producers really are about is they are internally driven and they want to determine their success. There are remaining other practices, but I think the first two are so important, and I can't emphasize enough for new loan officers that they go through those steps.
I think the second one particularly kind of appeals to me, and I think what's interesting about that one are the, in quotes, the times we're in. I normally don't date my interviews because I consider them to be timeless, if done correct. But right now we're in January of 2003, and last year has been just a fabulous year for originators. And I was just interviewing Jeff Lake a couple hours ago, and he said, unless you're dead, you're going to be able to go out there and get business right now. And but what I find interesting, and I've been around 29 years in the business, you've been around over 20, is the fact that you get into these waves. Our business is a business of contraction and expansion. It's the way it is. It's the way it's always going to be. And a lot of the loan officers, and correct me if I'm wrong, who are out there right now, they're kind of going along without a marketing plan because in some cases, truth be told, they don't really need one. They can just fall into enough deals to keep them going. But you and I know that at some point the worm does turn and the business will change, and I think those people that don't have a marketing plan and don't set goals for themselves, they're setting themselves up for failure.
Well, I can't agree with you more, and certainly one of the things that I would kind of say, even in this market, what our firm sees is that, again, it's a very hot market where refis have been certainly a large percentage of people's production, but even in this market, basically the turnover rate in loan officers is still over 50%. Even in this market, basically almost 60% of the loan officers do not make their budget, which is essentially most companies have an annualized goal of trying to make somewhere between $6 million in production. So I would say that the second point that's really also crucial that I saw with the research that we did is that top producers are successful regardless of market conditions. I mean, it doesn't really matter if they're in a refi market or in a purchase money market. They have a plan of action that they operate under, and essentially that plan of action obviously gets adjusted due to market conditions, but that is really their ticket to success. So again, I cannot emphasize that the time that you spend in a marketing plan and looking at your market and revising where the growth is going to come from, that time is well worthwhile. That definitely pays off. It's a weight of gold for you. But again, many loan officers, and we see it all the time, is that they want to skip that step. Oh, I'm too busy, I can't do this, I can't do that. And I would tell you that the time that you spend doing that basically makes your life day to day a lot easier.
Well, why don't we flip this over a bit and look upon that from a management standpoint? And I guess my question to you would be in reverse order: is what should managers, what can they do to make sure that their people are following those steps?
Well, essentially, certainly one of the things that we emphasize is that when we are talking to managers, that the recruiting of basically the individuals that have the personality characteristics to be successful in mortgage originations, that's their first job, to hire right. When you hire right, it makes a lot of the other part a lot easier, because hiring right really is involved with looking at individuals that have high self-motivation. The manager themselves can't really give the motivation levels to the individuals. That's really up to the person. What the manager has to do is to provide the framework, the model for success, to make that time period where the self-motivated individual can basically get the core rules and guidelines together of how the mortgage industry works, and then they can essentially be successful at it. So the manager's job is to make sure that they hire right, to hire smart, and to provide the informational guidelines that these highly self-motivated individuals need to have to basically be successful. What we found in the research for the first book was that mortgage originators tend to their pattern of success starts relatively early when they join the mortgage industry. It takes them about basically between 12 to 18, 24 months to really start to get their model of success of how they should work, and that time period is relatively quick. The manager's job in that is to guide them along that period, but you're not really in the role of having to motivate these individuals. What you're in the role of really as a coach.
What about testing? Do you believe that the new applicants should be tested?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. In fact, actually, my firm is involved with providing sales assessment testing. And, John, I can't convey enough. I mean, I was an ex-production manager, and I handled salespeople in different stints in my career. And a lot of times when you're in a company as a manager, you tend to think like, well, all successful salespeople look like Harry. Well, it could be that Harry is outgoing, but that's really not the characteristic that really matters. So sales assessment testing is somewhat like FICO scoring, where we have become a lot more sophisticated in it, and we are able to really look at the core personality characteristics that matter. And this outgoingness that is always tied together with being good at sales really has nothing to do with it. In fact, actually, many of the top producers at the top 100 companies will describe themselves as shy. So, again, what really matters are high energy levels, optimism. I mean, again, there's a litany of characteristics that are important. And as I said, sales assessment testing, there's good tests out there and there's bad tests out there, but it's something that should be part of a tool of a hiring manager to help them in the process.
Yeah, I happen to know you do testing. I was kind of setting you up with that question, but interestingly enough, what you don't know is that one of my clients happens to be one of your clients. We've never really discussed this, but all I'll say is that they're in the Northeast corridor, and I was talking to them one day, and somehow we started talking about you, and this person was a regional manager. He said, yeah, he says it's really kind of interesting, and he turned to his assistant and said, give me one of those tests she has, and anyway, she brought it on over, and he said, yeah, he said, it's really kind of interesting. He says, I really wasn't a great believer in doing this initially, but he says, it's really kind of funny now. He says, we've been doing this for, I don't know if he said a year and a half, but whatever, it was right in that group, and he said, it's really kind of funny now how going back and looking at who we hired and who we didn't and how they done, all of a sudden, these things are now starting to proof out. So I thought it was a really, really nice compliment.
I think, John, you really hit the nail on the head. I think that there's something intuitively we as people don't want to. We want to think that we're actually always very unique, and I think what testing is somewhat like FICO scoring, where we are looking at characteristics, and if you look at it on a broad enough basis, you can come up with some picture. Again, it's not the end tool. It should be used as a screening out tool, so you're not wasting time interviewing people that don't have these core characteristics, but that doesn't mean that you have to hire the person that scored well. I mean, obviously, it's still up to you. You have to go through an interview process, but it is interesting, and actually Gene's response is very typical of what we see, but once you get involved with this and it becomes part of your tools, it's like you wonder, like, how did you live without it?
Yeah, so it's almost management by exception then.
Well, yeah, I mean, in a way, it's certainly part of the what my firm has been doing over the last few years after the research was done for the first book is that we talk about this whole hiring component and what we do know, and we do know that there is a link between core personality characteristics and sales success. And what's interesting about it, John, is that basically your previous experience is not a core characteristic, and so that's kind of a hard concept in the mortgage industry to really understand. Typically, they only look at individuals that have a prior pipeline, but the fact of the matter is that that pipeline might be a refi pipeline, and when it really comes down to having to generate a relationship with their customer base or the referral sources, that they really don't have these core relationship selling characteristics that you have, and that's when you end up seeing basically people that don't make it when the market changes. The good producers, because they have the core characteristics, are successful regardless of the market. If anything, when they get a hot market like a refi market, they just increase their market share. I mean, that's what ends up happening. And so, yeah, so it is interesting, and I do think that more and more companies are recognizing with such high turnover that you really can't afford not to be selective when you hire.
It's kind of interesting that you took a guess. You used the word Gene, so obviously this guy must have talked to you about me. But let me ask you, how does a manager, when you have loan officers that are out there, they've been out there for 6 or 8 months, and they're bringing in some business, primarily refi business, certainly in the beginning in this market, most of the business is going to be refi business. How do they inculcate some of these best practices and that you mentioned in your book?
Well, a lot of times what I see, and certainly I think the value of the book is it's a handbook for originators, and someone as what you're describing, I get many calls from originators that literally leave the book on their desk, and when they have an issue, they go to the book and it directs them, well, here's what the best do. I can't emphasize enough, certainly if, again, the book is a combination of analysis of top producers all over the country, but the best thing that a loan officer could do that's 6 or 8 months is to really look at who is the best in their office. By looking at who is the best in their office, who is really the best originator, you will see practices that, certainly will tell you that they recognize that the refi market is essentially a temporary phenomena. I mean, just look internally to your best producers. Those characteristics are going to match up to basically what is written about in the book.
Well, when you talk about that, there is a certain truth to it. I was talking to, as I said, Jeff Lake, who's one of the top 5 in the country for last year, and what was interesting is that he was in essence kind of confirming that by saying, if I have any advice to give loan officers, it would be for them in the early stages to hook up with a top mentor, someone who really is one of the top producers in their office and has the kind of characteristics and qualities that they want to emulate. And he's not the first one that said that. Quite a few of the people I've interviewed, especially on the management side, all say that they just love a good mentoring program.
Well, the interesting point about that, John, is that a couple comments that I would make is that certainly what you find about top producers is that the top producers are willing to share. I think a lot of times that loan officers feel that they can't approach a top producer, that the top producer will reject them. That's really not the case. And again, the research showed the top producers at these top 100 firms were more than willing to spend time. They're not feeling a competitive side against you. They've established themselves in a marketplace with basically their core approach to their business. So there is not the competitive issue that they will not share the information. So one of the things that I would certainly recommend for loan officers to do is to make that effort. Likewise, the top producer is not going to reach out to you. I mean, you have to recognize that you're going to have to make that effort yourself. If that, in fact, is not possible and you're more comfortable with, in essence, forming a relationship with a peer that might be more experienced, in other words, that's another approach to go. But I can't recommend enough that the loan officer look at pursuing a relationship with the better producers, because the better producers certainly have formed sales techniques that work. And that's one thing that was definitely seen across the country in all these different markets, that it's a high customer service level that the loan officer has to produce. That is what the top producers are about. So that's really independent of whether you're in a small town or a large town. The sales techniques of handling their customers in such a way that they will generate referral business is really what the top producers are all about.
Well, I not only agree, but I would say in almost 100% of the interviews I've done with the very top loan officers, and let's say in the top 100, almost without exception, eventually they get around to using terms like customer service level, customers for life, or some variation on that thing. But it really gets back to, tunneling down, creating a customer who, in essence, that he's just going to refer 5, or she is going to refer 5 or 6 loan applicants to each and every single year.
Yeah, I would have to just emphasize, and when we do workshops and when I talk about this whole issue, I think loan officers have a misconception that they think that, if they are accurate and they're available, that's going to generate referral business.
Right.
That doesn't really, the customer's expectation is that you are that as a minimum. If you want to move into having referral, in other words, someone to be an advocate for you, you have to deliver extraordinary service. And what is extraordinary service? Essentially, it's tied together with that you have to form a role of you giving advice. So that's a whole different relationship than essentially that you're just listing products and that you're able to list them in an accurate way. That will not generate referral business for you. And certainly I think the top producers understand this and practice this every day. Frankly, what I see with them is that, customer service seems to be a trite word, but they really live it every day. And they deliver it not in an average way, but in an extraordinary way. And that can mean really going beyond every day what the customer is expecting. And that's a hard standard to do. And that's why this is an industry that the very best really care about the customers, and that requires them to put 100% effort into it.
Right. And to that end, now I've never talked to him, but I've heard a lot about him. Dave Savage has a product out there called the Mortgage Coach. And, it's a software program where the essence of it is that it helps you become the trusted advisor to these people, and they have all sorts of tools and the analytical tools that you can use to create that, from printouts, side by sides, and many other vehicles. And in commercial real estate, you learn highest and best value, and net present value, and present and future value, and that's what these kind of tools give you the ability to give some financial advice, and in essence become their trusted advisor, much like their CPA.
Right. No question that we saw that really the top producers will define themselves as a financial consultant, not so much a mortgage consultant. And actually my company is also in the process of essentially putting a downloadable workbook on that exact topic. We also do one on the planning component too, because again, I can't emphasize enough that in order for you to be successful in your market opportunity, what the top producers are doing is they figure out what is the unserved niche, and you can't skip that step. You have to look at it. That's what makes this business a wonderful business, because in every market there's some unserved opportunity. The top producers are smart enough to figure it out. The other thing that I would say about the top producers is they definitely specialize, and so as we go along further and further, more recently, people are not generalists anymore. They definitely niche into a specific niche opportunity, and you can't do that unless you really have done some type of market analysis. I mean, so I can't emphasize that enough, that you can have wonderful customer services, but if you haven't figured out your market opportunity, it becomes, okay, you really got to get that first, then the service level side coincides.
Yeah, well, to even take that a step further, one of the people I interviewed some time back was Charlotte Ellis from Chase, and she's I believe, out in Utah, and she specializes, it's either, I don't know why I always get it mixed up, only CPAs or only attorneys, but the point of it is, she has reached such a level of expertise with that niche market that she told me she never talks to realtors, never goes out and approaches them. She just gets all her people, and I believe it's from CPAs. The more I talk about it, she has the ability to analyze tax returns that are very complex.
Right.
And because of that, she's bringing value to that niche process, and she has a lot of respect. And she just, at this point, she answers her telephone.
Yeah, what we saw with the top producers is that less than 50% of their volume was coming from real estate agents. I think definitely the view of top producers is that as more and more of the real estate companies are getting their own mortgage companies, that less and less of the business is going to be coming through that avenue. And so their view is that as we go out 5 and 10 years, it's going to be even less. So the business is changing in one aspect, that the traditional sources are really not going to be probably your referral sources, but at the same token, your opportunities now are bigger than ever, because certainly the sophistication level on a lot of these products and the niche, as you just talked about, John, about understanding accounting and financial stuff, that's even greater. So I do think that you have to think out of the box and look at your market opportunity as being not necessarily the traditional real estate referral source.
Yeah, and it is an untapped market. I'll bet in 3 interviews I've mentioned the fact that I come from, or I live in a very historic town, Cambridge, Maryland, in the Eastern Shore, and we have a lot of homes still from the 1660s and 1670s around down here, and it's a small community. You have about 10,000 people, and maybe 5 or 6 CPAs that services the market. And it's interesting because I know a couple of them, I 2 at the top, and loan officers never call on them. It's just an amazing thing that there would be an untapped market. And one of the CPAs I was talking to not too long ago said, gee, do you know a good loan officer? I got all these people here that I'd like to get refied, and I really don't know who to call. I find that kind of an amazing statement, even in a town as small as this.
Yeah, it's interesting that, there's over 30,000 originators in the country, but even with those types of numbers, it's amazing, how many opportunities are out there for an individual that's willing to work hard, an individual that's willing to really care about their customer, and essentially have a self-employed mindset. So again, it's a terrific opportunity for those that really match that type of setup. So even though there's 30,000, the fact of life is that there are market opportunities in every market.
Why do you think a lot of, having said said that, and knowing full well that as this market does inevitably turn, that there will be a bloodletting of sorts. The people who aren't going to make it, what are some of the characteristics that they show?
Well, I mean, an easy answer to that is to say that they have the reverse characteristics of what you see for the top producers. But I would have to say, John, that the bloodletting is continuous within the mortgage industry. Even in this market, what is going on is that the turnover rates still are over 50%.
That shocks me.
And that, those numbers are consistent, and it's still in this market. If that number shocks you, this number will really shock you. Is that again, and again, I see this at the top companies, is that 60% of their staffs are not making budget, which is basically $6 million a year. So really what you are seeing is 40% of the originators are doing all the business. And that is even today. So we're not talking about, that it was due to some market. What we're saying is that we have a large group of people, even in a hot market, that basically are not, pulling their share. And the challenge the companies have is to address it through hiring better and obviously targeting their training to improve these individuals. And then obviously some of these individuals really are not a match. There's not a job match that is occurring. In other words, their core personality characteristics don't match with what is needed to be successful in relationships. So
doesn't some of the blame, really what I'm picking up something a little bit different. Doesn't a lot of the blame here lie squarely on companies that aren't hiring properly and on managers that maybe their choices aren't being vetted by at least somebody else?
Well, I agree. I would agree that, certainly all of what you have mentioned is part of the reason. And I do think that you have to couple with the big reason, which I think is there's stereotypes of what you need to have as characteristics to be successful in selling. And I think some of those characteristics, again, this whole idea that you have to be outgoing, that is not really true. Again, as I said to you, that some of the top producers are outgoing and definitely meeters and greeters and so forth, but others are not, and they are still top producers. So again, some of these stereotypes of what you need to have are really way off base, and a lot of what my company tries to do is that we work with companies to change, like here's what really matters and here's what you need to be looking for. One of the big problems that I think the mortgage industry makes is that we only hire within the mortgage industry. We feel that you have to, that the mortgage industry is so difficult that you can't come into it and be taught the business. And part of what we show is that there's no relationships between, that you have to be in the industry to be successful. In fact, there have been projects that we've worked on recently where we've taken people that basically had core personality characteristics, have taught them the business, and they have succeeded essentially very quickly. So I think the number one characteristic with companies, John, is that they get caught up in this whole thing that the business is so complicated, we can't do it. If you don't have a pipeline, you can't come in. Those types of attitudes really start off where you're looking at the wrong mix, and we end up hiring from other companies. We, in essence, pirate from other companies. And when you do that as your hiring strategy, all you're doing is really hiring people that are the chronic burnouts and or aren't going to make it anyway, whereas the people that are really good producers, that 40% producers, they stay with their company anyway. So again, a lot of the job hopping really just increases our turnover because we're never going to make some of those folks happy.
Well, here's something that you'll be able to focus on. I've always been told, and I've been in management too, it's been a while back, but that there's really only two ways to hire. Either you go out and find somebody from scratch and you train them and hope they don't look and find out about any other companies, and the other way is to go after that group of loan officers that have a year and a half, 2 years experience, so you don't have that upfront training load. And the proof positive of that is you read the ads in the Washington Post and others. How many ads do you see? Must have a year experience or prefer 2 years experience or whatever. And I think what you're saying is, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, again, part of what I would tell companies, or part of what we tell companies, and this is kind of an interesting fact that really people don't, I think of, is that, for instance, the research for the top producers showed that 60% of the female top producers came from an operational background, and 50% of the men came from an operational background. So the first thing that you need to look at is to cast this wide net, which would be including people that are in basically other types of the business, not necessarily sales. Again, you should be looking internally for the right person that matches up with these personality characteristics, the reason why they're in operations may not have anything to do with what their personality characteristics are like. So certainly I would say that. And then the second component of casting a wide net is really to look at people outside the mortgage industry. And obviously the component that you have to have in place is a training effort. And the training effort needs to be there. I can show you data that will tell you that financially it works out better if you if you hire on a broad basis the right individuals and you train them. Essentially, your turnover rate, your return on investment rate is much better than if you go and take somebody with an $8 million pipeline, bring them in, and customers. So we definitely are espousing that there's a casting of a wide net, because the fact of the matter is that only 25% of the total population base has these personality characteristics. So you got to be looking for them on a broad basis.
Now, when you say broad basis, you mean within and without the mortgage industry?
Right, yes.
How about some of the other best practices that you haven't talked about? You mentioned some of the top 2 or 3.
Well, certainly some of it, basically, I mean, just to hit on the highs on some of them, is that top producers obviously effectively manage their time. They delegate the unimportant. Again, they're doing things which they recognize themselves. If I had to say what they're about in kind of one line, is that these people have a self-employment mentality, even though they are a W-2 employee. And I think they conduct themselves that way. Time's important to them. They try to figure out the shortest way to do things. Again, part of these best practices really tie together with that they look at themselves as self-employed. So many times, John, when I do workshops, and I do quite a lot of them across the country, the loan officers don't feel they're self-employed. They feel that they are an employee. Their mentality is of an employee to a lender, to a bank. And the fact of life is that when you have that type of attitude, you basically really are not a match for what relationship selling is about. And so you're going to have a difficult time because you really are looking for, in the direction of your lender, to provide you with your training, with everything. And what you see with top producers, because they have a self-employment attitude, that they will go out and go get training if they're not getting it within their company. It's a whole different mindset. And so I would suggest that if I had to say what these individuals are about, is that they have a self-employment mindset. And I think marginal producers as a whole, what you tend to see is they haven't built a successful sales model, and therefore what happens with them is that they really are looking for somebody else to give it to them when they really have to do it themselves.
Right. And, I just read no more than about 4 days ago, I had some extra time. I was reading a back issue of Mortgage Banking magazine. It was a November issue of 2002, and I read the most fascinating article about a guy named Kevin Shannon, who is running the retail production for Bank of America out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And what's really interesting, and I'm dying to talk to this guy someday, what's really interesting about him is that he is one of the advantages the Bank of America has, a very strong one, is the number of banking branches that they have throughout the country. It's something like 4,200, and it's huge. And they also have a setup where they have their retail origination offices, straight mortgage banking branches like you and I have known for years. But what he's doing is that he is instead of like some banks where, all the purchase money first get channeled out to those people, and the banking people inside don't handle it. They do home equities and HELOCs and stuff like that. He's kind of changing the paradigm a bit, and he is going to create a group of people who are origination loan officers, with that sort of mentality, like you said, right within the banking branches themselves. And I think that's an interesting experiment. I hope he's successful at it. I think it's an interesting idea. Where he's really coming from is the fact that, that this is a kind of dovetail in with what you're talking about, that this is a relationship business today. And it is the business of creating relationships. And, of course, what he wants to do to bring dollars to the bottom line is that he wants to create that relationship, to have those employees in the banking offices acting like self-employed loan officers in terms of their mentality, so that they can cross-sell and bring value to the customer.
Well, I can't agree with you, anymore. I mean, really, part of what we espouse and when I speak is that this is a relationship selling business, and the fact that we have high turnover and poor customer retention is a due reflection of the loan officer hasn't built any rapport at the point of sale or at the referral source arena. So you cannot explain in these markets that are highly strong today poor numbers, which would be such high turnover and poor performance levels, unless you have to look at, well, what is actually going on. The relationship selling side's not there. But I will tell you to a point that the top producers establish the relationship. They don't skip that step. They
Right.
make sure the customer and them see eyeball to eyeball is how they often discuss it. They want to form a relationship, and they recognize that the time spent up front for that will translate into less time because they're getting referrals from it. They certainly understand the equation that referral sources make life easy, a lot easier for you. So the relationship selling side, I think in the industry, what has happened is that we have thought that technology will give us basically some method that will do it for us, but it comes down to that a customer wants to be serviced. The fact of life is that getting a mortgage for a customer is one of the distressing, most anxiety-driven events that they go through, and all of our DU and LP has not addressed those issues, and you still need it at the point of sale. So I am very optimistic, and I think also all the top producers are, that they feel that that point of sale side, is still an important point, and don't see, that those point of actions are going to be done away with. I know a lot of times in the industry we talk about, customers are going on the internet or whatever. That is never going to be a tremendous part of the business. We are kidding ourselves. This is all about relationship selling.
Right. And it's all about, the Internet's going to be used for information gathering, very much like the car business, the new car business.
Right.
They thought that, people would gravitate to the Internet and buy cars, and all these dealerships would get bypassed. What they found out is that they went there and got all the price information, and then they go to the dealership so they can slam the door and kick the tire and then beat up on the price, beat the salesman up on price because they know exactly what they're talking about.
Right, and that's the same way with the mortgage industry. And this, one of the things that I want to say that loan officers, especially new loan officers that would be listening to this tape, is that the biggest misconception of the industry is that this is a price-sensitive industry. That is not correct.
Right.
This is a relationship industry, and unfortunately, those that don't understand that end up basically being left on the wayside because, as the top producers discussed in the book, is that this is an industry of service levels, and we always look at price as being some excuse, and frankly, many times, price as a reason that you lost a deal is often really centered on that you did not really do a good job.
Exactly. You should never. I used to tell my people, now this was years ago, that anything within an eighth of an interest rate percent or a quarter point, if you, I don't even want to hear about it. You start getting into a 0.25%, 0.3%, now you're talking a potential problem. But, all you need to do is be in the zone.
Right. And that's very true.
Yeah. Well, we're slowly running out of time here, and I mentioned that I want to say just a little bit of time talking to you. I know that you have a new book coming out in a little bit. It's I know you're excited about it. We haven't talked a lot about it. You interviewed, I believe, 7 of the top women.
Yeah, it's actually 8. And I am very excited about it.
I wonder if you could spend just a couple minutes talking about it. We don't have too much time, but
Well, yeah, the book is really, it focuses on the top women producers at, again, the top large mortgage banking firms. And the book is really a how-to for those entering looking at commission sales. It addresses all the issues that really nobody talks about, this whole fear of going into a commission sales job. It talks about how to handle the politics when you're internally within a company. Even if you're a top salesman, you still have politics. It talks about how to balance your career and your life. So, John, it's really the top women women sales producers are terrific, and they have a lot of business advice to give. And the book will be out at the end of April, and you can order it off our website. But it is a terrific introduction to the loan origination business, because they are certainly sharing not only their life stories, which are fascinating unto itself, but they are giving concrete, realistic, down-to-earth, practical advice of what you need to do to be successful at this business.
You threw one number out. We chatted a little bit about the book last week, and there was one statistic kind of came to my mind, and correct me if I don't have it exactly right, but it was like 25 to 30% of the originators are women, but and yet half of the top producers are women.
That's true.
Did I have that right?
Yeah, well, actually you do. It's in the mortgage banking. Half of the top producers in mortgage banking are women, but they're only coming out of a pool that's essentially less than 30%. So the female top producers are rising to the top, but they're really coming out of a small amount. That's why part of what the purpose of the book is to encourage females to look at commission sales. Commission sales is a wonderful opportunity to have not only tremendous upside, but the opportunity to have freedom and to control your own destiny. And a lot of the stories that the women in the book share are stories about basically, they either, again, there's no divine calling to do mortgage originations. They fell into it. They got recommended into it. They, in essence, went into commission sales, and they discussed all these issues that, what it takes to, and how long it takes for you to get going before you can really kind of support yourself. But at the same token, these people have been doing it for many years, have been highly successful, and I think they give a lot of terrific advice for any new originator or anyone coming into the industry who's looking to do it.
Well, I look forward to the book and to reading it. And as you say, it's going to be out in a couple months.
Right.
And we'll put a link on the website, so if anybody wants to email you, they certainly can get in touch with you.
Yes.
Anyway, well, look, I would like to kind of wrap it up here, and I wanted to thank you so much for taking your time. A lot of the points you made, I think, are very applicable both to loan officers and to management that's listening to this today. And I would encourage them to go back and to read your original book, which has become a bit of a classic in a little less than 2 years. So anyway, just to wrap it up, I want to thank you very much, Pat, and best of luck to you.
Thanks, John. It's terrific.
Okay.